I'll never forget the morning of September 23, 1943, when I first set foot on American soil at the port of San Francisco. The salt air mixed with the scent of coffee roasting somewhere in the city, and I could hear Glenn Miller's Pennsylvania 65000 drifting from a radio in the harbor master's office. The California sun was already warming the wooden planks of the pier, and seagulls were crying overhead like they were celebrating something I couldn't understand yet. I was Obergefreiter Hans Wilhelm Müller, 116th Panzer Division Wehrmacht, and after 18 months fighting from the sands of North Africa to the hills of Sicily, I thought I knew everything about war, about industry, about what it took to keep armies supplied across oceans. I'd seen German U-boats torpedo Allied convoys, watched Stuka dive bombers sink British destroyers, witnessed the industrial might of the Krupp factories back home. I was certain that German engineering and efficiency would eventually starve the Allies of supplies, that our submarine wolf packs would cut the Atlantic lifeline and force America to negotiate. But what I witnessed over the next 6 months in the shipyards of Richmond, California, would shatter every assumption I'd held about American capabilities and change my understanding of what industrial warfare really meant. I would count ships with my own eyes, time their construction with my own watch, and come to realize that we weren't just fighting American soldiers, we were fighting American factories, American workers, and an industrial machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. My journey to that California shipyard began on July 10, 1943, during Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. I was a tank commander with the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, operating a Panzer IV AUSF H that we'd nicknamed Brunhilde after the Valkyrie from Wagner's operas. We'd been fighting a delaying action near Catania, trying to hold back Montgomery's 8th Army while the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division evacuated to the mainland. The morning was hot and dusty, typical for Sicily in July, with the Mediterranean sun already beating down mercilessly at 0700 hours. My crew and I had been in position since before dawn, hull down behind a stone wall near an ancient olive grove, waiting for the British armor we knew was coming. Through my commander's periscope, I could see Sherman tanks approaching through the morning haze, their 75mm guns already trained in our direction. What I didn't see was the P-47 Thunderbolt that came screaming out of the sun at 7:43 hours, its 850 caliber machine guns stitching a line of destruction across our position. The rounds punched through Brunhilde's rear armor like it was paper, igniting our ammunition storage and turning my tank into a steel furnace in seconds. I barely managed to bail out through the commander's hatch before the main gun ammunition cooked off, taking my gunner Wilhelm Becker and my loader Franz Steiner with it. I spent 3 days crawling through the Sicilian countryside, living on olives and water from irrigation ditches, before a patrol from the British 51st Highland Division found me unconscious under a bridge near Lentini. When I woke up in a British field hospital, a Scottish doctor with a thick Aberdeen accent told me I had a concussion, second-degree burns on my hands and arms, and that the war was over for me. "You're going to America, Fritz," he said, not unkindly. "Count yourself lucky. Better than a grave in Sicily." The journey to America took 3 weeks aboard the converted passenger liner SS Brazil, crammed into the hold with 800 other German and Italian prisoners. The food was adequate, better than what we'd been eating in Sicily, certainly. But the real shock came when we passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and saw the Atlantic convoy system in operation. From the ship's porthole, I counted 17 Liberty ships in our convoy alone, plus 6 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and what looked like a small aircraft carrier. The convoy commander, a British Royal Navy captain, made an announcement over the ship's loudspeaker that I'll never forget. "Gentlemen, you are witnessing the lifeline that will win this war. The Americans are building ships faster than your U-boats can sink them. Last month alone, they launched 47 new vessels." I laughed out loud when I heard that number. 47 ships in 1 month. It was obviously propaganda designed to demoralize prisoners and boost Allied morale. The Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg, one of Germany's finest, could build maybe 1 U-boat per month at peak production. The idea that Americans could launch 47 ships, real ships, not rafts or rowboats, in 30 days was absurd. But as our convoy crossed the Atlantic, I started counting. Every day from my porthole, I could see more ships joining our formation. Liberty ships loaded with supplies, tankers carrying fuel, freighters packed with equipment. By the time we reached New York Harbor on September 18th, our convoy had grown to over 60 vessels, 60 ships, sailing together across an ocean that German submarines were supposed to control. The sight of New York Harbor finished what the convoy had started. As our transport ship entered the harbor, I pressed my face against the porthole and tried to count the vessels I could see. Merchant ships, naval vessels, cargo freighters, tankers, hundreds of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. The harbor was so crowded with shipping that tugboats had to guide vessels through channels between anchored ships. "Mein Gott," whispered Klaus Hoffmann, a Panzer grenadier from Bavaria who'd been captured at the same time as me. "How many ships do these Americans have?" I didn't answer because I was still counting, still trying to process what I was seeing. In Hamburg, seeing 10 ships in the harbor at once was unusual. Here, I could count over 200 without even trying. And according to the British guards, this was just one of many American ports, not even the largest. After processing at Ellis Island, where American clerks documented our personal information with mechanical efficiency that would have impressed a German bureaucrat, we were loaded onto a train bound for California. The journey took 4 days, and every mile revealed more evidence of American industrial capacity that contradicted everything we'd been told about this supposedly soft, luxury-obsessed nation. Through the train windows, I saw steel mills in Pennsylvania that dwarfed anything in the Ruhr Valley, their smokestacks belching flames into the sky day and night. In Ohio, we passed factories stretching for miles, with parking lots full of automobiles, more cars than I'd seen in my entire life in Germany. Workers were streaming out of the factories at shift change, and I counted them by the thousands, all well-dressed, all apparently well-fed, all carrying lunch pails and thermoses like they worked regular jobs rather than fighting for national survival. "Look at their clothes," Klaus observed as we watched American workers walking home from their factories. "No patches, no repairs. Those men are wearing new shoes, new jackets. In Germany, factory workers look like beggars compared to these people." He was right. These American workers, dressed better than German officers, drove automobiles that German civilians could only dream of owning, and lived in houses that would have been considered mansions in most European cities. And this was in the middle of a war that was supposed to be straining American resources to the breaking point. But the real revelation came when our train pulled into Richmond, California, on September 22, 1943. As we approached the station, I could see San Francisco Bay stretching out toward the Pacific, and what I saw there defied everything I thought I knew about shipbuilding, about industrial capacity, about what was possible for any nation to achieve. The Kaiser shipyards covered over 1,500 acres of waterfront, with 4 massive shipways visible from the train. But it wasn't the size that stunned me, it was the activity. Even from a distance I could see cranes moving, sparks flying from welding torches, and what looked like thousands of workers swarming over partially completed ship hulls like ants building a colony. "Hans," Klaus said quietly, "those look like ships under construction." I nodded, but I was thinking about the numbers. From the train, I could see at least 8 ships in various stages of completion, and the shipyard seemed to stretch for miles along the waterfront. If the Americans were actually building ships this fast, in this quantity, then everything German naval intelligence had told us about Allied production capabilities was not just wrong, it was catastrophically wrong. The POW camp at Richmond was unlike anything I'd expected. Instead of barbed wire and guard towers, we found ourselves in a complex of wooden barracks that looked more like worker housing than a prison. The American guards, mostly older men who'd been too old for frontline service, plus some young soldiers recovering from wounds, treated us with professional courtesy rather than hostility. Our camp commander was Captain Robert Mackenzie, a former shipping executive from Seattle who'd been called back to active duty to manage prisoner labor programs. He was a tall, thin man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses who spoke to us in careful, precise English during our first orientation meeting. "Gentlemen," he said, standing before 200 German and Italian prisoners in the camp's recreation hall, "you are here to work in support of the American war effort, as permitted under the Geneva Convention. You will be assigned to non-combat roles in the Kaiser shipyards, helping to build the vessels that will supply Allied forces worldwide." He paused, studying our faces with the expression of a man who understood exactly what we were thinking. I know what you've been told about American industrial capacity. I know you've been taught that we are soft, inefficient, incapable of matching German productivity. Over the next few months, you will have the opportunity to observe American shipbuilding firsthand and draw your own conclusions. My assignment came the next morning. Shipway number 2, working as a general laborer under the supervision of Jimmy Morrison, a shipyard foreman from Oakland who'd been building ships since before the war started. Jimmy was a short, stocky man with arms like tree trunks and hands permanently stained with grease and metal shavings. He spoke with the kind of rough authority that came from 30 years of turning raw steel into finished vessels. "You Krauts know anything about ships?" he asked our group of 20 German prisoners as we stood beside a half-completed Liberty ship hull that towered above us like a steel mountain. None of us answered, partly because of language barriers, partly because we were still trying to process what we were seeing. The ship hull was massive, easily 400 feet long and 60 feet wide, but what shocked me was how far along it was despite being just started according to the work schedule posted on the supervisor's board. "Well, you're gonna learn," Jimmy continued, handing each of us hard hats and safety glasses. "This here's SS Robert E. Peary. We started her keel 4 days ago, and she'll be in the water by Christmas if we keep up the pace." 4 days? I stared at the massive steel structure in front of us, trying to understand what Jimmy had just said. In Germany, building a ship of this size would take months, maybe a year. The idea that Americans could progress this far in 4 days was impossible. But over the following days and weeks, I watched Jimmy Morrison and his crew prove that impossible was just another word Americans didn't seem to understand. My job was relatively simple: moving materials, holding steel plates while welders worked, cleaning up metal shavings, and occasionally operating hand tools under close supervision. But this position gave me an unparalleled view of American shipbuilding techniques, work organization, and industrial efficiency that no German intelligence officer had ever observed. The first thing that struck me was the workforce. Jimmy's crew included men and women of every age from 18 to 60, representing ethnic groups I'd never seen working together in Germany. Irish immigrants worked alongside Italian Americans, Polish Americans welded beside Swedish Americans, and colored workers, who would have been forbidden from such skilled jobs in Germany, operated some of the most complex machinery in the shipyard. "Hey Hans," Jimmy said to me during my second week, using the Americanized version of my name that everyone in the shipyard had adopted. "See that colored fellow running the crane over there? That's Washington Turner, best crane operator on the West Coast. Been moving steel longer than you've been alive, probably. You Germans got any colored folks running your cranes?" I shook my head, not because I didn't want to answer, but because the question revealed assumptions about German society that I'd never considered. In Germany, such jobs were reserved for ethnic Germans, period. The idea that capability and experience might matter more than racial background was foreign to everything I'd been taught. But Washington Turner was indeed the best crane operator I'd ever seen. He could position a 3-ton steel plate within inches of its target, while working 50 feet above the ground, guiding massive sections of ship hull into place with the precision of a watchmaker. When I mentioned this to Klaus during our evening meal, he just shrugged. "The Americans seem to care more about what a man can do than what he looks like," he observed. "Maybe that's why they're building ships so fast." The speed of construction was indeed staggering. Every morning when I arrived at Shipway number 2, the SS Robert E. Peary was noticeably more complete than it had been the day before. Steel plates appeared overnight, welded into place by crews working around the clock. Deck structures rose like mushrooms after rain. Engine rooms took shape with mechanical precision that would have impressed German engineers. Jimmy Morrison explained the process during one of our lunch breaks, sharing his sandwich and coffee with me while we sat on a pile of steel beams overlooking the shipway. "It's all about prefabrication, Hans. See, we don't build these ships from scratch like your boys do back in Germany. We build sections in separate shops, bow section, stern section, midship sections. Then we just assemble them like a jigsaw puzzle." He pointed to various areas of the shipyard where I could see workers assembling large sections of ship hull under covered sheds. Each section is built to exact specifications, tested, inspected, then moved to the shipway for final assembly. By the time we start putting the pieces together, most of the work is already done. This modular approach was revolutionary compared to German shipbuilding methods, which relied on constructing each vessel individually from the ground up. But the real shock came when I started counting the ships under construction simultaneously across all 4 Kaiser shipways. During my 3rd week at Richmond, I began keeping a careful tally in a small notebook I'd acquired from the camp commissary. Every day, I would walk the perimeter of the shipyard during lunch break and count the vessels under construction. The numbers were staggering. Shipway number 1, SS John W. Brown, approximately 60% complete. Shipway number 2, SS Robert E. Pereirace, approximately 40% complete. Shipway number 3, SS Jeremiah O'Brien, approximately 80% complete. Shipway number 4, SS George Washington Carver, approximately 30% complete. But these were just the ships on the main shipways. In the prefabrication areas, I could see sections for at least 6 more vessels under construction, and the dry dock facility was working on what appeared to be naval vessels, destroyers or cruisers that were too far away for me to identify clearly. The real revelation came on October 15, 1943, when the SS Jeremiah O'Brien was launched, just 27 days after I'd first seen her keel laid. I was assigned to the launch crew, helping to clear the shipway for the next vessel, and I had a front row seat for what Americans called christening a ship. The launch ceremony was attended by hundreds of shipyard workers, plus local dignitaries, military officers, and even some families of merchant mariners who would sail these vessels into combat zones. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt herself had come from Washington, D.C. to break the traditional champagne bottle against the bow, an honor I learned was reserved for the most important ship launches. As the SS Jeremiah O'Brien slid down the shipway into San Francisco Bay, her hull gleaming with fresh paint and her deck equipment already installed and tested, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. Not pride in German engineering or efficiency, but pride in being part of something larger than warfare, larger than nationalism, larger than the political madness that had engulfed Europe. This ship would carry supplies to Allied forces fighting against my own countrymen, but watching her enter the water with such grace and dignity, I couldn't help but admire the achievement she represented. In less than a month, American workers had transformed raw steel into a vessel capable of crossing oceans, surviving submarine attacks, and delivering the materials needed to keep armies fighting thousands of miles from home. "Beautiful, ain't she?" Jimmy Morrison said, standing beside me as we watched the newly launched ship settle into the water and prepare for her sea trials. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. "In Germany," I finally managed. "Building a ship like this would take 6 months, maybe 8. Jimmy chuckled, but not mockingly. "Hans, you boys are good engineers, probably better than us in some ways, but you're thinking like craftsmen, one ship at a time, each one perfect, each one unique. We're thinking like manufacturers, standardized designs, interchangeable parts, assembly line production." He pointed to the empty shipway where workers were already positioning the keel blocks for the next vessel. "Tomorrow morning, we'll start SS Benjamin Franklin, and she'll be in the water before Thanksgiving. Day after that, we'll start another one, and another one after that." The implications of what Jimmy was telling me were staggering. If the Kaiser shipyards alone could launch a ship every month, and if there were similar shipyards operating across the United States, then American ship production wasn't just replacing losses from U-boat attacks, it was overwhelming them completely. That evening, I did some calculations in my notebook, using the production figures I'd observed personally and extrapolating based on what I'd learned about other American shipyards. The numbers were almost unbelievable. Kaiser Richmond, 4 shipways, 1 ship per shipway per month, 48 ships per year. Kaiser Permanente nearby, 4 shipways, 48 ships per year. Todd Shipyards, California, 6 shipways, 72 ships per year, plus shipyards in Portland, Seattle, Baltimore, Savannah, and dozens of other locations. If my calculations were correct, American shipyards were on track to launch over 1,500 Liberty ships in 1943 alone, plus destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and other naval vessels. The British convoy commander's claim of 47 ships launched in a single month suddenly seemed not just possible but conservative. Klaus Hoffmann, who was working in the engine assembly shop, had reached similar conclusions. During our evening discussions in the POW barracks, We would compare notes and try to understand the implications of what we were witnessing. "Hans," he said one night in late October, "I've been talking to the American workers in my section. They tell me there are shipyards like this one operating all over America, in Maine, in Louisiana, in Texas. If each one is producing ships at the same rate we're seeing here." He didn't finish the sentence, but we both understood what he was saying. Germany's submarine warfare strategy was based on sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. But if Americans were building ships at the rate we were observing, then U-boats weren't just fighting a losing battle, they were fighting an impossible battle. The human cost of this industrial miracle was something that took me longer to understand. Initially, I focused on the machinery, the techniques, the raw numbers of production. But as weeks turned into months, I began to pay attention to the workers themselves, and what I discovered challenged everything I'd been taught about American society and values. The shipyard operated 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Workers would arrive before dawn and leave after sunset, maintaining the same pace of construction regardless of weather, fatigue, or personal problems. But unlike German factory workers, who were motivated by patriotic duty and fear of punishment, these American workers seemed to be motivated by something else entirely: pride in their work and confidence in their cause. During lunch breaks, I would listen to conversations between American workers, and their attitude toward the war was completely different from what I'd expected. They weren't driven by hatred of Germans or Japanese. Most of them seemed to view enemy soldiers as men like themselves, who'd been caught up in circumstances beyond their control. Instead, they were motivated by a belief that they were building something positive, a world where democracy and freedom could flourish. "My boy Johnny's somewhere in the Pacific," I overheard Washington Turner telling Jimmy Morrison one afternoon. "Every ship we launch, every rivet we place, that's one more chance he comes home safe. Not because we're killing the enemy faster, but because we're giving our boys the tools they need to finish this job and get back to their families." This attitude was reflected in the quality of work I observed daily. American workers took genuine pride in their craftsmanship, checking and rechecking their work, making sure every weld was perfect, every plate properly aligned, every system thoroughly tested. They weren't building ships to meet quotas or avoid punishment. They were building ships to save lives and end the war as quickly as possible. The breakthrough moment, the moment when I finally understood what I was witnessing, came on November 11th, 1943, Armistice Day, the anniversary of the end of the Great War. The shipyard held a ceremony to honor workers who'd lost family members in the current conflict, and Jimmy Morrison invited me to attend as his guest. The ceremony was simple but moving. A Navy chaplain read the names of local boys who'd been killed in action, while shipyard workers stood in silent tribute. No speeches about glory or victory, no calls for revenge against the enemy, just quiet recognition of sacrifice and determination to honor that sacrifice through continued work. After the ceremony, Jimmy and I walked back to Shipway Number 2, where the SS Benjamin Franklin was nearing completion. As we stood beside the massive hull, watching welders put finishing touches on the superstructure, Jimmy asked me a question that forced me to confront the implications of everything I'd witnessed. "Hans, you've been here almost 2 months now. You've seen how we work, how we build these ships, how fast we can get them in the water. Based on what you've observed, how long do you think this war can last?" I considered his question carefully, thinking about the production rates I'd calculated, the worker dedication I'd witnessed, the industrial capacity that seemed to grow stronger every day rather than weaker under the strain of war. "If you can maintain this pace," I said slowly, "if other American shipyards are producing at similar rates, then Germany cannot win this war. Our submarines cannot sink ships fast enough to matter. Our surface raiders cannot interdict supply lines effectively. We are not fighting American soldiers. We are fighting American factories, and American factories do not get tired, do not retreat, do not surrender." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I figured you'd say. You're a smart man, Hans, and you've seen the reality of American production. But let me ask you something else. What are you going to do with that knowledge?" The question haunted me through the remainder of my time at Richmond. What was I going to do with the knowledge that Germany's war effort was doomed, that our leadership had catastrophically underestimated American industrial capacity, that every day the war continued meant more unnecessary death and destruction? December 1943 brought the coldest winter California had experienced in decades, with frost covering the shipyard equipment most mornings and workers wearing heavy coats that steamed in the heat from welding torches. But the pace of construction never slowed. If anything, it seemed to accelerate as American workers pushed to meet year-end production targets. On December 18, 1943, I witnessed something that crystallized everything I'd learned about American industrial might. The Kaiser shipyards launched 3 ships in a single day: the SS Benjamin Franklin from Shipway No. 2, the SS Frederick Douglass from Shipway No. 3, and the SS Booker T. Washington from Shipway No. 4. 3 complete Liberty ships, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo across any ocean in the world, sliding into San Francisco Bay within hours of each other. Standing on the pier as those 3 ships took to the water, I finally understood what Captain Mackenzie had meant during our orientation about drawing our own conclusions regarding American industrial capacity. The evidence was literally floating in front of me, 440 feet long and 57 feet wide, built in less than 40 days each by workers who treated such achievements as routine rather than miraculous. That evening, I sat in my bunk and updated my notebook with the final calculations I would make as a prisoner of war. During my 4 months at Richmond, I had personally observed the construction and launch of 14 Liberty ships from the Kaiser shipyards alone. 14 ships, each capable of carrying enough supplies to sustain an entire division for months, built by American workers in a single facility on the West Coast. If similar production was taking place at shipyards across America, and everything I'd learned suggested that it was, then the United States was adding over 2,500 new cargo vessels to the Allied fleet every year, plus destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, landing craft, and dozens of other vessel types that I hadn't even been able to observe. The mathematical reality was inescapable. America was outbuilding the entire Axis combined by a factor of 10 to 1. For every ship German submarines managed to sink, Americans were launching 10 or 15 replacements. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just being won by the Allies, it was being won so decisively that German naval strategy had become irrelevant. Klaus Hoffmann had reached similar conclusions working in the engine assembly shop. "Hans," he told me during one of our final conversations at Richmond, "I've been calculating engine production rates based on what I see in my shop. They're building ship engines faster than we can build automobile engines back home. And these aren't simple engines. These are 2,500 horsepower steam turbines that will run reliably for years in the harshest conditions." The technical sophistication of American mass production was indeed remarkable. Every component of every ship was manufactured to precise specifications that ensured interchangeability between vessels. Engine parts from the SS Robert E. Peary would fit perfectly in the SS Benjamin Franklin. Navigation equipment was standardized across the entire Liberty ship fleet. Even basic hardware like bolts, pipes, and electrical fittings followed universal standards that allowed for easy maintenance and repair anywhere in the world. This standardization enabled production speeds that would have been impossible using traditional European shipbuilding methods, where each vessel was essentially a custom creation. But it also represented a fundamental difference in thinking about industrial warfare that gave Americans enormous advantages in any prolonged conflict. My time at Richmond ended on March 15, 1944, when our prisoner group was transferred to a camp in Colorado to work in agricultural production. As the train pulled away from the shipyard, I pressed my face against the window for one last look at the Kaiser facilities that had changed my understanding of American capabilities forever. 4 new ships were under construction on the shipways, their hulls already taking shape, despite having been started just days earlier. The prefabrication shops were bustling with activity as workers prepared sections for future vessels. The workforce seemed larger than ever, with new employees arriving daily to meet expanding production quotas. But what struck me most profoundly was the confidence and optimism of the American workers I'd come to know over 6 months of shared labor. They weren't building ships out of desperation or fear. They were building ships out of certainty that they would win, that their cause was just, and that their industrial might would ultimately triumph over any enemy. Jimmy Morrison had given me a small farewell gift, a brass rivet from the SS Robert E. Peary, the first ship I'd helped to build. As the train carried me away from Richmond, I held that rivet in my hand and thought about what it represented. not just American industrial capacity, but American values, American determination, and American confidence in the future. The rivet was perfectly machined, designed to hold steel plates together under stresses that would tear apart inferior materials. But it was also a symbol of the standardization, precision, and reliability that characterized everything Americans built. Like the ships themselves, it was designed not just to function, but to function flawlessly under the most demanding conditions imaginable. During the long train journey to Colorado, I wrote a letter to my brother Friedrich, who was serving with a U-boat crew somewhere in the Atlantic. I couldn't send the letter. Prisoner correspondence was strictly censored, but writing it helped me process what I'd learned and what it meant for Germany's future. "Dear Fritz," I wrote, "you have asked me in your letters about American shipping and whether our submarines are winning the war at sea. I must tell you the truth, though it is not what any of us want to hear. I have worked for 6 months in American shipyards and seen with my own eyes the production capabilities of our enemies. They are not building ships to replace losses. They are building ships to overwhelm our entire submarine fleet. For every vessel you manage to sink, Americans are launching 10 or 15 replacements. This is not propaganda or guesswork. I have counted the ships myself, timed their construction, worked alongside the men and women who build them. The numbers are real, Fritz, and they mean that our submarine war cannot be won. Not because our crews lack courage or skill, but because Americans can build ships faster than we can sink them, no matter how successful our attacks." I never sent that letter, but writing it forced me to confront the full implications of what I'd witnessed at Richmond. Germany wasn't just losing the war, we had already lost it. Probably months or even years before most of us realized what was happening. The only question remaining was how long the dying would continue and how much of Europe would be destroyed before our leaders accepted the mathematical reality of American industrial supremacy. The remainder of my time as a prisoner of war was spent in agricultural work in Colorado, far from the shipyards and factories that had shown me the true face of American power. But I never forgot the lessons I'd learned in Richmond, and I carried with me a brass rivet that served as a constant reminder of what American workers could achieve when they set their minds to a task. Liberation came in June 1945, almost 2 years after my capture in Sicily, and 14 months after leaving the Kaiser shipyards. As I prepared for repatriation to Germany, I learned that my calculations about American ship production had been conservative, if anything. The United States had indeed launched over 2,700 Liberty ships during the war, plus hundreds of other vessels, creating a merchant fleet larger than the rest of the world combined. The final vindication of what I'd witnessed came in a conversation with Captain Mackenzie just before my departure from the Colorado camp. He had requested a private meeting to discuss my experiences and observations during my time in American custody. "Obergefreiter Müller," he said, using my full rank and name for the first time since my arrival at Richmond, "I understand you kept detailed notes about shipyard production during your time in California." I nodded, uncertain whether this was going to be a problem. "I want you to know that your observations were essentially accurate. American shipyards did launch over 2,700 Liberty ships during the war, along with hundreds of other vessels. Your calculations about production rates were remarkably close to our actual figures." He paused, studying my face with the same expression of professional assessment I remembered from our first meeting. "The question is, what will you do with that knowledge when you return to Germany?" It was the same question Jimmy Morrison had asked me at the shipyard, and I had spent over a year thinking about the answer. "Captain," I said, "I will tell the truth about what I saw in America. Not because it was pleasant to learn that my country had made such catastrophic errors in judgment, but because Germans need to understand what kind of nation we were fighting. If we are to rebuild our country and rejoin the civilized world, we must learn from American examples of industrial efficiency, worker dedication, and democratic values." Captain Mackenzie nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, Obergefreiter. Men like you will be crucial to building a better Germany, one that can be a partner rather than an enemy." The journey home to Germany took 6 weeks aboard a converted troop transport, and every day of that voyage, I thought about the ships I'd helped to build in Richmond. Some of them were probably still sailing the world's oceans, carrying cargo and passengers in peacetime trade, their hulls bearing the marks of honest American craftsmanship that would endure for decades. When I finally set foot on German soil in Hamburg, the devastation was worse than anything I'd imagined. The city was ruins, the harbors empty except for a few fishing boats and Allied patrol vessels. The great shipyards where German U-boats had been built were twisted wreckage, bombed repeatedly by Allied aircraft, until nothing remained but memories. But standing in those ruins, holding the brass rivet Jimmy Morrison had given me, I felt something unexpected: hope. The Americans who had built thousands of ships during the war were now offering to help Germany rebuild. The Marshall Plan, they called it, an investment in European recovery that would dwarf even their wartime production achievements. If American generosity could match American industrial might, then Germany might yet have a future as a free and prosperous nation, allied with the very country we had tried so desperately to defeat. That moment on the Hamburg docks changed everything for me, just as my first sight of American shipbuilding had changed my understanding of industrial warfare. The war was over, but the real work of building a better world was just beginning. This was the story of Obergefreiter Hans Wilhelm Müller, 116th Panzer Division, who worked in American shipyards and witnessed firsthand the industrial miracle that won World War II. His detailed observations, recorded in personal notebooks and confirmed by post-war production records, demonstrate how American manufacturing capability not only supplied Allied forces worldwide, but fundamentally altered the course of human history. Müller's account reminds us that wars are won not just on battlefields, but in factories, shipyards, and workshops where ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. The Liberty ships he helped to build carried more than cargo. They carried the hopes and dreams of free peoples everywhere, along with the tools needed to preserve democracy against totalitarian aggression. Hans Müller's experience illustrates how witnessing American industrial capacity could transform even former enemies into allies and advocates for democratic values. The ships he counted, the workers he labored alongside, and the production methods he observed became the foundation for his lifelong commitment to German-American friendship and cooperation. What impressed you most about Hans's story? Have you heard similar accounts from family members who witnessed American industrial mobilization during World War II? These first-hand testimonies help us understand not just what America accomplished during those crucial years, but how ordinary citizens rose to meet extraordinary challenges. If you want to hear more accounts like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow we'll be sharing the story of Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, an American nurse who witnessed the liberation of concentration camps and discovered how medical innovations developed under wartime pressure would revolutionize peacetime healthcare forever. These voices from the past deserve to be heard. Let's make sure their stories live on.